Okay, well, I'd like to get things started on time. I'm Jack Keyes. I'm the director of the Center for Improvement Science. And welcome, find a seat. And every quarter or so, the Collaboration Network does a broader topic where we'd like to have as many people as we can around a particular issue, so that we can reach out and help people connect to one another. The Center for Improvement Science is part of the CCTST, which is the University of Cincinnati's CTSA grant. It's a federal grant that is it's centered at the university, but the major partners are Children's Hospital, the entire university, UC Health, and the VA. So those are the institutions. Now, this grant reaches out in the community, and we have many community partners. And we do a lot of research training in the community. We have grant availability in the community. So we really have taken on a very broad mandate in a huge population. One of the major features of that grant that was mandated the last time we reapplied for funding was that we promote collaboration and team science. And so the Center for Improvement Science houses that major effort. Not all of it, but the vast majority of it. We do a lot of workshops that are open to everyone. We do a lot of consultations with individuals and teams and groups and entities to help them work better, to help them find collaborators, to help them apply for grants, a wide range of things there. But the other thing that we do is we promote collaboration. And we formed the Collaboration Network, referred to as TCN, which you all can join if you're not already members. You the opportunity to connect with other people and put yourself out there to help people get to know you, you get to know them. But the goal of that is collaboration. It meets every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. And we usually have a fairly small group there. We highlight individuals. We have presentations of people that are trying to get connected in a more broad way. They may be looking for specific collaborators around their topics of interest to help them with grants or programs or connections, things like that. As I said a minute ago, we have once every quarter or so, we have a much broader topic and a much broader meeting. And we split those meetings out from 1 hour to 2 hours. We have a couple of presentations of people that can talk to you about their areas of interest. And then we follow up with trying to structure some after meetings, if you will, or ways that we can working. So today's topic is mental and behavioral health. How many of you were at the Mental Health Action Forum? So that really was only a week and a half ago. It was a face-to-face held here. They had good turnout, and their goal is to take the issues of mental health into some action steps that will again connect the community and the university. We had planned to have a little bit more coordination between that event and this event. I think because of planning and a number of other things, it's a little less coordinated than we'd like, but it's a very important topic. And we wanted to make sure that we could reach out to people and Laura invited 1,000 people to this meeting today. We immediately figured out they couldn't fit all. And that's why we started. And I was not going to feed 1,000 people, not with a few bagels and other goodies that I have, or 5 minutes, anything without them. So, we have a good crowd here in our room here at the Medical Science Facility. I'm going to ask however many people we have on the phone to introduce themselves, but I will ask people in this room to go around and introduce themselves. And then I think a brief introduction, and we will get presentations.
Excuse me, can I interrupt? I'm very sorry, but it's really hard to hear you. So can folks mute themselves if they're not talking?
Right. We need everybody to mute themselves if they're online because we can hear everything you're doing. That was fast.
See everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, we got this. In these meetings, it's always a bit of a challenge. We found.
Can I just say, in addition, email me or text me the number I put on the agenda to let us know who you are. So we don't. Thank you.
Follow up everybody at the TCN mailing list, and also people that give us their contact information. We'll follow up with summary and other information from today's meeting so that you have all of that. And let's go around the table and introduce ourselves, and we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Rachel Nolan. I'm from the Institute from the College of Medicine. No, listener from Molano. Flor on the side.
Jim Herman, Department of Pharmacology.
I'm the Director of Center for Improvement Science.
Sharon DeMario, Center Director for the Z Area Health Education Center out of the college.
I work at
my name is Chuck Randall.
So, with the Cancer Center with the College of Medicine.
Okay. I want to just say a few words about the general purpose in having this meeting and what we're trying to do here, and then we'll get started with our presentations. I was unable to move, just happened to the.
Jen's got it because she's muted.
Jen,
Can you use the
you
arrow?
stole my mouse.
The arrow.
It won't work.
Yeah.
All right. Are they all muted? Do you think?
Well, right now.
I can randomly push
Some
buttons.
people were muted or somehow became unmuted.
Okay, let's start here.
So,
All right,
sorry.
I will. Okay, all right. So one of the issues that we typically find, and we do surveys of faculty across the university. We also do it within our colleges. One of the things that we found that is a universal for most faculty is that they feel isolated. That they, in the work that they're doing, even if they are working in a department where they have many colleagues, they're usually working on something unique where they're trying to take it somewhere where they just don't know who to talk to next. And a lot of that is, we work and we train in silos. And so we take the problems that we're looking at from our perspective. We take the things that we are doing from our perspective, and we know that there are other aspects of it, but it's a challenge for us to go find the people that know those kinds of things. While it's personally frustrating, it also has significant impact on our ability in our careers, in our lives, to be able to move programs, grants, other kinds of things, because the problems that we're dealing with, the funding sources that are out there, all of the things that help drive us as individuals and as professionals are saying we want to see problems approached from a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective. And that's a challenge. And I watched and talked with one young professional here and listened to him say when he got to this place and he didn't know this, he went back to school and got this degree. And then when he got to the next place and he couldn't go any further, he went back to school and got that degree. And I was imagining his entire career would be bouncing from degree to degree to degree. And I asked him why he didn't just find colleagues that already had those degrees, and it would save him a year or two of training. But his main answer was he's tried, he couldn't find it. And so I had to give him credit that he was very ingenious in that when he ran into those obstacles, he just went and got another degree. But you can see the shortcoming of that long term. So working and training in silos, it has both advantages and disadvantages. But when we have to reach out, when we find ourselves trying to move our careers forward and we're feeling isolated, it's often we don't know where to go. We don't know how to approach this. And so one of the reasons we have this group and we have these meetings is because what we're finding is on the right is we all have our own connections. And what it takes is you making connection with somebody in another area and then using their connections and finding people in those areas that have other connections. And it's a matter of building a network where you don't have to know everybody, but you have to know who knows other people. So it's very much not what you know, but it's who you know. So the purpose of what we do here for collaboration is to help everybody build these networks, build more connections so that you can bridge into different areas. And if the person you know in the different area, they don't have the expertise, they may know somebody. So that is what we do here. I think I have just one more slide. Okay, all right. So the value proposition for collaboration, because it does take time and it does take effort. I've known several faculty when they come here, particularly in the College of Medicine, and I don't know how they pull this off, but their chairs will give them like 6 months to find their way around. And they will spend 6 months knocking on doors, door after door, and then they ask the people they talk to, who's the next person I should talk to? Who's the next person I should talk to? So sometimes I'm near the beginning of that list, sometimes I'm in the middle, sometimes I'm at the end. But I find, these faculty are dogged about getting to know people. It's not a terribly efficient way to do it. This is a little bit better for us, I think. But the value proposition for collaboration it's more than these three. But when I talk to faculty, here are the three things that they like. It makes them feel less lonely. So even if they have collaborators in their small area, if they're in a unique area, they feel very lonely. And you know what it's like to feel lonely. It's isolation, and you really don't know where to go, and it really takes a lot out of you. The other is that it's great for creativity. So if you have people that are trained in different areas and have different perspectives on a problem, you're going to hear things that you would never have come up with. You're going to hear experiences that you've never had. And a lot of the high value, high impact grants that are now being funded really capitalize on the ability of putting together a team and then have them be creative. And then finally, productivity. We can't do it all ourselves. If we've got a grant deadline in January, it's really hard for one person to do all of that and putting together a good grant. So having a pretty broad team makes you much more productive in many ways, and that's very important to faculty as well. So I'm going to stop here because this is the purpose of this group, is to help make connections. We've done one in aging. We did another one on social determinants of health, and this is our third one. So we in the Center for Improvement Science, we are not about aging, and we are not about social determinants of health, and we are not about mental health and behavioral health. What we are about is having these meetings and bringing together the people who are in this space from a lot of different perspectives, talk about what they're doing so that we can help people make these rich connections. I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Jim Herman, and he introduced himself a minute ago, but he's going to talk about what he is doing in the stress neurobiology laboratory and groups that he has, and telling you a little bit about the areas where they are doing work, and perhaps giving people on the line and here in the room an opportunity to connect with Jim to be part of what they're doing. And I'm so glad to see other people having the same kinds of technological challenges that I do. I don't feel so isolated now.
Yeah, that one.
You're up.
Okay, so now we're ready to go. Start this up. As Jack said, I am a researcher in the Department of Pharmacology. My work for over the last years has been really looking at the biology. This is very.
We have a really bad microphone.
Yeah. Oh, do I have to speak even louder?
Way over there,
Okay,
yeah.
great. So my research has been centered on the biology of stress, and this is extremely relevant for this particular topic. The stress is probably one of the biggest threats, also probably one of the biggest opportunities for solving problems related to mental health. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about stress? We're all aware of all of these various daily hassles that we have to deal with: traffic, the TSA lines, etc. And then we have these types of things that happen intermittently, like writing NIH grants against this ever dwindling. And then, of course, there are stressors that never seem to go away. And this is, of course, an example of a person under chronic stress or a chronic stressor, depending on your. The important thing about these particular stimuli is that there's nothing associated with these that is threatening you physiologically. It's not robbing you of oxygen. It's not making you bleed. It's not giving you an infection. We become stressed by virtue of the fact that we create our own stressors. Things that in themselves are biologically relevant. We make them biologically relevant by using our inefficient brains manufacture these types of stress responses. So our big problem within the context of stress, how it is that we process these particular types of pieces of it. Let's say a word about
No, just roll it.
Donald Trump.
We got stuck in it.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, great.
I don't know.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry about that. So one of the points I want to make about this is the importance of, as we're considering stress, the importance of considering context. So this is me and my hiking guide, my son, in Banff National Park in Canada. And my son is an expert hiker. He's hiked the Northeast Mountains. He's hiked in the Pacific Northwest. He's hiked in the Canadian Rockies. And he tells me that there are important things to consider when you're hiking. And these are two of them. So on the left-hand side, you have the American black bear. And on the right-hand side, you have the grizzly bear. And he tells me that how you react to the types of response that you can make is going to be critical for your survival. Right? And so if you're looking at the one on the left, you can intimidate black bears. You can make noise, use pepper spray, etc. And you can use active behaviors to actually deal with the situation. On the right is a bigger problem. And the most effective way to deal with this is to play dead, be a passive covert. So the most efficient response depends on the context. And that's really critical to how we understand stress, and particularly how we understand stress in the context. This is the infamous inverted U-shaped curve. This applies to almost any biological system. And basically, it says all things in moderation. When we're considering stress, what you can see is that this performance of our system, give it the brain, give it the body, whatever system we're talking about, operates best under when challenged with the addition of stress responses. So the stress response is necessary to optimize performance of the individual. And these can be modulated by any number of factors such as hormones and neural systems. So where we run into trouble on this curve is if our response is too large or if our response is inadequate. So if we have too large a response, you're going to run into problems with what it is that the stress systems do to your body, how those can hurt you, body and your. Conversely, if you don't have that adequate response, you're not going to be able to meet challenges that. So what we want is an optimal match of response and context. Of your stress system match the context of the stress system. I mean, most of us are amazingly good. So almost everybody that I talk to when I say that I'm a stress researcher says, oh, you can use me as a subject. And yet, the vast majority of people aren't walking around with elevated cortisol levels or cardiovascular dysfunction, right? The vast majority of us deal with this good. It's where this breaks down that has important components for mental health. These are the systems, two of the systems that modify these responses, and you probably know them well. We're all familiar with the fight or flight response. That if you're confronted with a stressor, your autonomic nervous system causes a response, which can very much help you through survival. And then you have also the hormonal system, which is all into the circulation, which of course is a very important hormone in glucose modulation and also in adaptation. The principal goal of these stress responses is really very simple and very important, and that is to move energy from one spot to another. What you need when you're running when you're with the bear, right? What you need is you need to have energy resources available that can help you stay. And so these systems basically take energy out of the liver, out of the fat, out of muscle, etc., and move it to help you survive. It's really a coordinated process. Jack talks about science. The stress response is also a team science. There's no one system that modifies these responses. Holistic, whole body response. I think we're learning that this is an important component when we're trying to fight stress. And just think about one organ system.
So the environment changes. There's no gravity. Systems won't go out of whack. That's still true.
So if you're in space, for example, yes, but they don't have a context. So if you look at some of the physiological data, physiology is all out of whack.
So the systems, so in other words, the stress system changes because of your
Certainly does.
whether you're
Yeah.
high altitude, right, space or water.
Right, because all of those are going to produce a background stress that's going to happen. So what are some of the benefits? We talked about these already. So these are normal and appropriate responses. To have these physiologically challenged. So the physiological response is a reaction, right? You have an infection, you need to fight it off. Also, normal and appropriate responses to psychological adversity. So psychological stressors engender responses that are anticipatory. You as the going to have to mount a physiological reaction. And these are required for adaptation and survival to survive without an appropriate stress response. And the very interesting thing, and this will become important in a couple of seconds here when we talk about brain mechanisms, is that stress produces very rapid changes in neurotransmission in the brain. There's a lot of things that happen in the brain from stress. There are things that happen in a long-term fashion, modifying gene expression, which affects the protein composition of the body. All good things that happen. Now, the bad things largely come as a result of stress that is either prolonged or unmanageable. What we know is that because stress consumes energy, it's going to take away from reserves. This happens at the cellular level and at the systemic level. That you lose your reserve capacity because you've expended it to fight off. Very importantly, these stress responses in brain render cells at risk for damage. For example, it's well known that stress hormones can make stroke outcomes worse, exacerbate epilepsy. And the reason behind that is that those cellular responses that have changed the energy level of the cells make them less able to fight off the pathology. So as a consequence, it tends to make things cause neurodegeneration, but it makes any process that is ongoing. Evidence that stress can trigger emergence of pathologies. So, for example, a lot of psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia are frequently, the first episode is frequently the result of a significant life stressor. Also good evidence that stress exposure can make people who are abstinent for drugs or alcohol. All of these things interface with these systems in the brain. These out-of-context stress responses, we'll talk about in a second, they negatively impact the brain circuits that control mood and emotion, which are at the center. So this is based on work that we've done in our lab and many others have. This is both in humans and in animals. So what we know is that animals that are placed under chronic stress, also true, a hypoactive prefrontal cortex. Cortex is a very important part of your brain that matches your context with your behavioral outcomes. Very good at problem solving. It's very good at accepting. What happens is the output of the system. Stress hypoactivation. And what does that do to the organism? Well, it reduces behavioral flexibility, reduces exploration as well. Your memory is enhanced. This is the hypofunction, for example, of this post-traumatic stress disorder. It enhances stress reactivity that actually your stress response is more pronounced when this region of the brain is hypoactive. The issue here is you think this is really a bad thing under conditions of stress. But let's think about this in a different way. So remember those 4 bullet points here. So now we're going to see what they really mean, right? So what happens in the conditions of hypofrontality is you rely on what works. You don't take significant risks. You remember bad things very well, and you're ready to fight or fly. So all of these things make perfect sense when you're living in a hostile world. If you are living in a hostile world, this is a reasonable strategy. The problem is, what happens? The state dependent of the chronic stress, right? So it's important for survival right now. Let's be hypofrontal and do these conservative types of behaviors to enhance our survivability. Where we run into trouble is when this becomes a trait that you have individuals that have underactive prefrontal cortices because of environmental their life or just if you have this hypofrontality, you're going to have those types of conservative, non-effective responses in the inappropriate context. So there's no reason that you should not be using cortex sitting in the figure, right? So it's not being able to use that appropriate context, I think, potential problems. The component of this is if the is overloaded, if the stress is so prolonged, so unpredictable, so unmanageable, you end up with persistent hypofrontality. In the long run, select behaviors that are inappropriate for the context. And before I sum up, I just want to mention that this is a very, very big thing, stress research, sex differences. And there are the sex differences in these responses, organization of these systems in the body are massive, and it is probably well ingrained in evolution of our species. The sexes differ in terms of biological priorities. So you have the whole reproductive system that for evolution needs to be. And you can argue that stress is going to be a bigger problem for females. And the problem is associated with the fact that males are reproductive and nurturing part of the behavioral repertoire, which doesn't happen. This is actually a really big one. Remember, I talked about that energy redistribution, and that in most mammals, females actually have lower body mass, lower fat mass than males. A equivalent loss in energy is going to have a bigger impact. As a consequence, the impact of stress is likely to differ for females and males. Have to think about both sexes. How to attack problems with sexes. So I can't leave without some good news. And some of the good news is that we can use stress management protocols. And this not only works for us, but it also works for, in my lab, for animal models of stress-related disorders. Voluntary exercise can significantly attenuate stress reactivity. So it can actively combat stress responses. And this is kind of ironic because actually when you're exercising, that is a stress response while you're exercising. The fact that you control it, the fact that you engage in it voluntarily can lead to stress reduction. I think this works in people that need to exercise. It's certainly and the other thing is reward. Basically, engaging pathways in your brain that are positive feedback. And we've done some work on this in collaboration with Reply, looking at natural rewarders. In this case, like a very small amount of a sweetened solution, and showing that that also has the ability to stress response. Something you like, doing something that tickles your reward pathways is the problem for us is that this may inadvertently, because of the comfort eating, contribute to the worse TCN. In this case, it's a double-edged sword. So with that, I'll stop and let's take any questions.
A lot of things that we do on the behavioral side alter the perception of the environmental stimuli in ways that either more help people more appropriately interpret things that are going, or in some cases maybe over-interpret to keep them having a significant stress response. Right. So a lot of things. The upfront, and I'm wondering because it's a whole cascade of things. So is there an optimal place to intervene here, or is one place as good as another as long as before it starts having deleterious effects?
I think you want to catch it before it starts having deleterious. The reason for that is that, as I mentioned, hormones, stress responses can have effects on gene transcription. These effects can be lasting. So you can modify particular genes in the brain, modify those that have clearly the effect of some of the really light stress, for example. Program how your genes and proteins are expressed in a permanent. Better to earlier you intervene.
One more question, then so we talk a lot about the genetic component of the stress response. And I can certainly see parts of it where the genetic piece would be logical. So release of different amounts of cortisol, things like that would be genetic, or the way the body responds to that. But is there evidence that there are genetic components near the front end for the interpretation of the stimuli?
In terms of how you're processing it. Yeah, and that could very well be that trait issue I was talking about. That prefrontal cortex is not set up to respond appropriately. You can have some of these things that is going to change. So in essence, it affects how the individual interacts with the world on a permanent basis.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any other questions before we move on? Okay, so our next speaker is Jen Molano, who I've had the privilege to work with on a lot of different things. And she's going to talk about brain health in general, but particularly with patients with mild cognitive. You should tell a little bit about what you do in neurology before we get too far into it.
It's good. I've got a froggy voice. For those of you who are on WebEx, bear with me if you can. So my background, I'm fellowship trained in both sleep medicine and behavioral neurology. So my role in the UC Memory Disorder Center is I do the sleep assessment for those folks. And it was interesting when I first decided that I knew when I was a resident that I was interested in sleep, but I was very interested in kind of how sleep and sleep fragmentation, sleep disturbances can impact cognition as well. Hence the combination of the two. And so, and just to kind of provide a little bit of a context, when we think about cognition from a behavioral neurology perspective, we kind of look at it from kind of two different angles. Number one, do they have any issues either subjectively or primarily objectively with their cognition? And number two, are they able to function on a day-to-day basis independently or not? And so when we talk about the cognitive continuum, when people who are quote unquote cognitively normal have no cognitive impairment, have normal functional status. On the other end of the spectrum, when people have a history of dementia, there's been a cognitive concern that's either been addressed by a family member or the patient themselves. Then when you do objective testing on them, there is objective cognitive impairment and they have impaired functional status. But there's this kind of in-between stage called mild cognitive impairment, which was actually coined by one of my mentors up at Mayo, Dr. Ron Peterson. When I asked him about the story about this, when I was looking at Mayo's clinic study of aging, what they were finding was that they were coding people as not dementia and not normal, and so they developed sort of in-between stage called mild cognitive impairment. And what this is that someone has a cognitive concern, there is an issue cognitively that's going on in one of the domains of cognition, either memory, attention, executive functioning, visual spatial skills, or language. And when you test them, there is objective cognitive impairment in one of those domains. But unlike people who have dementia, where people with dementia have impaired functional status, people with mild cognitive impairment are able to do their activities of daily living and without any sort of issue. So what we find from a cognitive perspective and a neurological perspective is that there are many different causes for mild cognitive impairment and dementia. A lot of times people come up to me and they say, so what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? And what I tell people is dementia is an umbrella term, just like mild cognitive impairment is an umbrella term. Alzheimer's disease is kind of the pathological cause of what's potentially happening. Different causes for mild cognitive impairment and dementia, where it's been most studied, has primarily been in the neurodegenerative sort of stages, with Alzheimer's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies. Although we do know that there are a lot of different just an underlying pathological process, but also other things such as medications, other medical conditions as well. Have implications from a pathological perspective. What we know about Alzheimer's disease is that there are two kind of underlying pathological substrates that are happening with Alzheimer's disease. This is what we call amyloid plaques, which can accumulate in the brain space. And then you can have what we call neurofibrillary tangles, which actually affects the brain cells themselves and can cause the brain cells to die. And what we know in terms of the progression of Alzheimer's disease, where kind of cognitive impairment comes into, is that people can have changes in the brain in what we call a pre-symptomatic or preclinical phase, approximately 15 to 20 years prior to the onset of symptoms occur. That's what we call mild cognitive impairment. That's when you actually start to have some of that neurodegeneration. We think that preclinical stage is the accumulation of amyloid in the brain, and that when symptoms actually start to occur, that's when what we call tau pathology in the brain cells themselves have actually started to become potential implications.
Okay.
Pictures of the other.
Try rolling.
There we go.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, it's already there. Right. So what we do know is that with general population getting older, with our baby boomers getting older, the number of individuals with all-cause dementia is expected to increase from 47 million in 2015 to 60 million by 2030. So that's an issue. The good news, though, is that, and the reassuring news, or the optimistic news, is that preventing or delaying the onset of dementia may reduce the global burden, and that 1/3 of the risk factors for dementia are potentially modifiable. So that includes vascular risk factors, improving vascular risk factors such as hypertension, obesity, smoking, depression, physical activity, social engagement, and treating diabetes as well. And some of the studies have even shown that the risk factors for dementia are modifiable even if people already have a genetic risk as well. And healthy lifestyle factors, such as physical activity and healthy diet, can help to modify the dementia risk, presumably through that sort of vascular sort of pathway and improving vascular outcomes. And then a multimodal lifestyle modification approach to brain health has produced the most efficacious. And so that is promising sort of news, especially since, as you all know, we don't have a cause, we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. We don't have, we don't have the magic bullets that are going to help with that. Challenge, and I come more from a clinical perspective. The lifestyle modification strategies to prevent brain health are very challenging to implement in a traditional clinic visit, primarily due to lack of time, and secondly because of information overload. My colleagues in the Memory Disorder Center, even though they have a very ample amount of time to see patients, I in the sleep clinic, for example, have 30 minutes to see a new patient and 30 minutes to see a follow-up patient. So it's not a very long amount of time. But in the cognitive clinic, they have developed a system where they are able to see people in a more comprehensive manner. So their initial visit is 2 hours. So they do a comprehensive history and physical examination on these folks. They do comprehensive neuropsychological testing. The family members are present so that family members can talk with a social worker in terms of what their perspectives are. Because what we find out a lot of times is that, especially in those with Alzheimer's disease or frontal temporal dementia, in terms of cognition or their behavioral issues may not be there. And so the family members and the caregivers get that. All done. They order tests, they do neuroimaging, they do blood work, they do a lumbar puncture. Because one of the ways that we find out if someone has potentially Alzheimer's process is by doing getting spinal fluid analysis to see if they have Alzheimer's. And a lot of times they order a sleep study to see if there's an underlying sleep conditions like sleep apnea that may be contributing as well. So they do all of this in a 2-hour period, and this is just their initial follow-up. And after they get all of this testing done, they come back and they come back for an hour and a half to summarize all of these tests, figure out if there's an underlying degenerative process or if there are any other issues that are going on. And then they may introduce lifestyle modification. But it may be only about 15 to 30 minutes they have in that 1.5 hours to do that. And if my colleagues, Dr. Sawyer or Dr. Lee, are kind of telling the patient, you've got Alzheimer's disease, the last thing that they're going to think about is, how am I supposed to implement these? Our proposed solution, and this is kind of inspired by the censoring group visits that Tiffany Deers and her team have done with Oxford patients. What we want to do, we propose this 6-week longitudinal group visit model to specifically promote strategies for brain health. The advantages of the group health model is that it does facilitate self-management, improves patient-physician relationships, increasing that time and consultation, promotes peer-to-peer learning and community building, and hopefully improves quality of life in those neurological conditions. There have been some studies in those who have neurological conditions, such as Parkinson's disease and neuromuscular disease, that it can improve the quality of life as well. It provides, again, that self-efficacy and help with that. Audience are patients with mild cognitive impairment and subjective cognitive symptoms, because there are some studies suggest that those who have subjective cognitive symptoms are at higher risk for having problems with mild cognitive impairment. We also look to include caregivers as well. So our goal for each group visit is to have 5 to 6 patient and caregiver dyads. And so our logistical needs, we need 2 facilitators working me. We're hoping that our nurse coordinator can help with that. Medical assistant space for 12 beginning stages. But our whole objective is to try to educate those with MCI or mild cognitive impairment on these relationships between vascular risk factors, modifiable lifestyle behaviors, and cognitive health. We want to empower people to be able to identify behaviors that they can try to implement at their own home. Because a lot of times, especially if they've been told that they've got mild cognitive impairment, that they've got positive biomarkers for Alzheimer's, I can put them in that sense of distress, and we want to try and empower them to say what to do about it. And to see if there's at least one measurable vascular risk factor that can improve before and after the participation. Our group visit format is slightly different than the ones that they do over at the hospital, in the sense that they do monthly visits, but we want to do kind of six weekly consecutive weeks where we have this cohort meet together. And basically what we do is we have a registration and welcome. We introduce the topic, do a couple of activities with the topic, and then there's some goal setting, and then we close. Approach the different models for this is basically based on some of the literature that's been found in terms of things that optimize brain health. Sleep is a big component of it. Trying to optimize as well. It keeps moving on. I'm not touching it.
It's moving your electric.
Nutrition, the MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet for hypertension, trying to have positive outcomes in terms of nutrition and cognitive health. Physical activity, one of the best things that we can do, in addition to reducing stress, one of the best things that we know that we can do for brain health is to exercise on a regular basis. And there's at least one study that shows just even 5 steps, barely the 1,500 or 15,000 steps that are recommended, can potentially help with brain health. Exercise is important, and what we're talking about is not just cognitive exercise in terms of things that you would see in luminosity and things like that. But what we know that helps with brain health is actually finding novel stimulating activities. So again, it's trying to find new ways to try and connect your brain and connect in different ways to do that. Teaching your brain to learn new things actually is more helpful. But the thing is, with the crossword puzzles and Sudoku and things like that, it's a pattern that you learn, that you started to learn. So it's not necessarily that pattern. It's more, again, reaching out, going outside of your comfort zone. Studies, my body skills, mindfulness, and can be helpful as well in terms of brain, so we want to incorporate that. I'm also trained as a mind body facilitator through Integrative Health, so we're trying to incorporate some of those in interaction that show a lot of different in terms of brain health as well. We don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. At the same time, helping to promote good quality of life we can do, and social interaction is one of those encouraged. In terms of the objective cardiovascular outcomes, these are the things that my colleagues in the cognitive clinic routinely screen on all of our patients initially. So looking at blood pressure, looking at their cholesterol, body mass index, and their diabetes metrics such as hemoglobin. Outcomes, we're looking at the promise measures from the NIH toolbox. We're looking at quality of life, positive health, active well-being, cognitive function in terms of how their subjective cognitive function is. Impairment and its self-efficacy, managing social interaction. Implementation challenge for us has been our clinical work, our day-to-day job, and quite challenging for something this together. One of my colleagues in the sleep clinic has just left greener pastures on him. So that's been an issue. We've had some staffing issues on the cognitive side as well. So that's been our biggest issue. Our hope is that we'll be able to bring this up and running within the next. I appreciate your bearing with my coursework. Do you all have any questions? I like this picture from the New York Times. It's about an article about one of the things that we know about sleep. One of the newest functions that we found out in the past 5 years or so is that sleep actually sweeps out toxins in the brain.
Well, the question I can is related more to the utilization or the integration of avatars, where the patient is actually being seen by an avatar, for instance, a veteran or warfighter who is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They're actually seeing this person in a distant side because the person they're seeing actually is a computer. In California, developed these about 15. Looking into that, still a little, it's not, ready for prime time, but has the lab thought about some of those things, utilizing advanced technologies to actually help diagnose and treat patients?
No, that's my knowledge. I mean, I think that's like something down the road that I know, in terms of telemedicine, that's a good thing. That's not an avatar per se, but it's trying to evaluate people kind of remotely. That's something.
Yes, because in the previous slide where you didn't have all the people saying that we've seen, I mean, that obviously telemedicine. Mobile health, I mean, more people have mobile phones today. Statistic is more cell phones have been sold in the last 18 months than television. That it's almost like we're demanding as consumers access to our health information through these kinds of things incumbent upon us. The actual developing methodologies where patients can be seen where what condition.
I think it's certainly something to consider. I think part of the challenge from a neurological perspective is that there are nuances to a neurological exam that can be very challenging to do from a remote perspective, such as, for example, if someone has dementia with Lewy bodies, for example. One of the key features for that is having Parkinson's. One of the things that you can test for tremor, you can test for your gait and things like that. But one of the things that we test for is kind of muscle tone and rigidity. That can be that might be a little bit challenging to do something more remotely. And so, there's something to be said. I'm just trying to think out loud that, if you kind of develop technology for an avatar to kind of tell you if there's a rigidity there or not, I think that would be very interesting.
You mentioned your challenges slide. A lot of it seems to be on the availability and utilization of the providers. There's not enough time, not enough providers. Two things. One is I'm thinking the other side of that equation. It's often a challenge for patients that frequently, particularly elderly patients, to get from wherever they are to these visits on a regular basis. So the challenge for the patient is, to be in this program, I've got to commit to X number of visits over X period of time. I've got to arrange transportation. I've got to make sure the insurance covers it. A whole range of things on that side. And as you were describing some of these things, I was wondering how much of this program, realistically, would be lifted at least partially out of Oxford, out of our clinical setting, and put into, say, local schools or churches or community centers. And I know that there are walking groups that go into shopping malls before they open, and there are a lot of other ways that communities have tried to do some of these things for elderly, but for any part of their population. And some of these things clearly had more need for connections with clinicians, but many of them may not have or couldn't have been addressed, at least partially with people, well-trained people, health workers. And is that on anybody's agenda or thinking about to expand a model like this with limited clinical resources?
I mean, I think the other two is
You went away.
Yeah. The other piece too is that this is a group visit model also in terms of trying to address whole idea of the mind.
Yes.
Is that you actually can, you can see those, allows you, instead of having to repeat the same thing multiple times, allow you to address that in a more, at a broader scale as well. I think, and that helps with, first, would help with my own personal burnout, actually. 30 minutes for a new patient and 30 minutes for a follow-up appointment can be quite challenging. But give me 2 hours with someone, I can develop a relationship a little bit more. But certainly, I think the other thing too is that, you know, that's just one piece of it. But can you partner with community resources in terms of the accountability and helping them continue to maintain these sort of things that they learn at their group visits by partnering with community partners? That would be fantastic.
Okay.
I think trying to find a hybrid between an ideal sort of state. Because the thing is, it's like you meet with them weekly, and we specifically targeted people who have subjective cognitive impairment or mild cognitive impairment, because overall be healthier and more mobile to be able to kind of go to these visits. So that was the reason why we had specifically focused on that, as opposed to people who may have more issues. But I think where the community networks can be helpful is in terms of people to sustain and make it a part of their practice, their day-to-day living. Some of the things.
The other question I have is this is a space where people are afraid. A lot of people are afraid either for themselves or their parents or grandparents have dementia. It's actually, for many of them, scarier than cancer because of the nature of it. And I just, there seems to be more and more stuff coming into this space. Brain exercises, there's drugs, how much of that is real? Is there any of it that's real? Any of it that, and how much of it is just snake oil?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of taking a pill, help the brain health.
There are.
There are.
Yeah.
I think the data is limited at best, but there have been robust studies that have reducing the vascular and how that is. So we know that midlife risk factors for dementia include high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, you know, and then like I said, the studies have shown, good studies have shown that the risk for dementia can be modified through reducing that vascular risk. There's robust intervention. So, but in terms of just giving a medication, right now things like Harrison and help with the symptomatic.
Well, we're going to try to keep on time. Anybody else have any other questions before we move on?
I
I'd like
do.
to mention that Dr. Schatz is planning a cognitive disorders activity event, CME accredited event. It's going to be held in March. So if there's anybody that is interested in attending, we're in the process of getting it approved for CME credit. She has been working really hard on this and she's putting a lot into it. I'm really excited. I think it's going to be wonderful.
It's going to be great. I'll be a part of it.
Yes,
Stephanie,
yes, I
you
remember
had-
seeing your name.
Stephanie, you had a question?
Yes, I just from a personal note, Jen, thanks for the presentation. But have we?
Could you hear me?
Yes, but yeah, I can tell your horse.
Bucket?
Yeah, we can't hear you that well.
You can't hear me?
And not well.
Okay. Well, then I can ask this of Jen later. It's a personal question because of chemotherapy. Have you thought of partnering with cancer at all? Because my mom.
Yeah, Dr. Schatz has been working with the cancer team as well. We've been in discussions with Michelle too. So yes, we've been in those discussions.
So,
Thank you.
moving on, one of the things we like to do with these sessions is we like to have a mix of presentations, some from inside the academic center, and then to make sure that we have a better balance and a different perspective. We want to make sure that we have participation from the community. So the next two presentations are coming from the community. Bob is a peer specialist at the Mental Health Association of Northern Kentucky, and works in the area of peer support. So we're going to turn it over to Bob and hear what some of the things are going on in the community in this space.
Good morning. My name is Bob Race. I work, as the slide says, as a Kentucky certified peer specialist. I work for Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio. Mental Health America has been in business for over 100 years. The founder was one of the ones that went into mental institutions at a very early age, and he literally took out the chains and the cuffs that people were held to the walls. And in our national headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, there's a bell that was fashioned out of those bracelets that mental health patients were attached to the wall. So that was our beginning, and I think the flavor of what that represents still powers our organization today. So what I'd like to talk about is what a peer does in our particular agency, how we operate the services that we give currently. So what is peer support? I know we all have an idea of what peers do. Many different environments where peers operate. The environment that I operate in and that Mental Health America operates in is substance abuse. Peer support, for example, in the first bullet, is the act of people who have had similar experiences, mental illness and substance use disorders. Let me just stop there. We have limited experience with substance use disorders and mental health issues. I'm an alcoholic. I have 25 years of sobriety, and I share that information with the people that I work with. We have recently changed our terminology to call the people that access our services participants, because they are participating in their own recovery. Earlier, I heard the word empowerment. That is such a key with us. We are there to deliver information, to stay with people side by side as they recover from both their mental health experiences and also from their substance abuse. The bottom part of the first bullet is we offer encouragement and particularly hope. We refer to ourselves as hope merchants. People come to us, they come to us out of jails, they come off the streets, they come from a homeless situation, and they have a very narrow view of the world. Sometimes they live in their rooms by themselves, they're living in camps somewhere if they're homeless, all sorts of experiences to say to them, I'm not getting a lot of assistance here as I move through my life. So that is our particular role. Second bullet, we are a recovery-oriented service. We are focused on recovery and empowerment. People that are peers, besides what I already described as my background, we've had people who work with us right now who are formerly homeless, have recovered from that. We have people who are who have a lot of different mental health issues, PTSD, Alzheimer's, not Alzheimer's, I'm sorry, and a variety of things that they've recovered from. Third bullet, a recovery-oriented service, ROSC, system of services that promotes the process of recovery by helping consumers develop broad lives that are not dominated by illness, are not your illness. A human being having, in some cases, what we refer to as a spiritual experience. We talk about spirituality appropriately, we hope. Anytime or anywhere, two or more peers are in a mutual supportive relationship. We are in a peer relationship. The person I'm working with is a peer of mine, shared lived experience. Any one of us could be affected by an unexpected life event or illness with peer support vital to our recovery and well-being. Studies that have been done on peer effectiveness. SAMHSA, for example, SAMHSA, Academy of Sciences, etc., the list goes on. They have evaluated peer services and found to be quite effective in the recovery environment. I've also worked at North Key Community Care in Northern Kentucky. I worked with a team of caregivers, a therapist, a social worker, And the three of us would get together and help determine the care plan. Support services, programs, discussions, events, groups, etc., within the behavioral health system. So what's a typical example of how people access our services? Right now at Mental Health America, we've recently put in what's called the Arizona Matrix Assessment, where we assess people on a number of life situations, housing, finances, their particular family, where they're living, et cetera, measured on a scale of 1 to 5 for each of those, roughly 12 dimensions. We put together a care plan based on that. Besides Mental Health America in Covington, which is where I work out of, we also have a community resource center called the PIER, PIER, in Newport. When they go through the program at Newport, they are moved to go into various classes that could help them. Parenting classes, stress management classes, anxiety classes, what we call double trouble classes. What is that? If they're dual addicted to substances, as well as they have mental health issues. That's quite often the case. We also are recently working with Children's Hospital as a trauma-informed care company. Year-long team building process around making ourselves more trauma-informed, and I'm part of that committee. In fact, the early indications are that our clients that are coming in, men and the women, are far more affected by early trauma than what we originally suspected. For 2 years, I was a co-facilitator in a women's recovery group. After story after story of the difficulties these women had in their earlier lives, I think certainly, beyond a doubt, impacted their outlook on life and how they medicated themselves, substances. Our services take place within the structure of an agency or organization, which I already mentioned too. It's provided as a free service, charge for this by a trained and certified specialist. A week-long training class, and I was tested after that and received my certification too. I also have a background in human resources. I also have a background as a trained energy practitioner, disability management, things of that nature. So a lot of those things I come into play and I use. Peer recovery support services stand along, well-documented and copied evidence-based mission. We're very much evidence-based. Doesn't work, we don't use it. If we try it, it works, fine, we'll move forward. Like you, that slide is just jumping up. I was just thank you for work that for me. Thank you. Peer support services. Historically, the substance use disorder recovery field led the way and recognized the importance of peer support services for a person seeking to come to terms with life-changing condition. As I stand, toe to toe, if you will, with a consumer, an organization. When she and I will talk about what happens when we take a drug or a drink. They know that I understand that. And they know that everybody that works as a peer at these agencies understand their situation. It's a very non-judgmental environment. We don't judge, we don't shame. What happens as we work with these clients is recovery from shame. Our culture shames us, traditions shame us, etc. We have to work very hard to help people rediscover their self-worth. How do we do that? Through empowerment, typically. Make them the center of the treatment. Improved outcomes are particularly notable when peer support services are provided to people with chronic conditions that require long-term self-management. What does long-term mean? When we work with an individual, we help to set in a care plan that includes structure on a daily basis. We get very deep into the weeds. For example, what time do you wake up? What do you do when you wake up? What do you eat for breakfast? Do you exercise? I've heard brain health here mentioned over and over again. We're very cognizant of how the brain works. We teach factors about the brain. We talk about dopamine. We talk about serotonin, things of that nature. We have our classes, which we do have classes. We'll get to those in a second. We also do meditation in the classes. Strong body-mind connection as before, because we know that your brain is remapping itself as it recovers from the drugs and alcohol. How long does it take to recover? Depending on who you talk to, as long as 9 to 11 years. Starting point up to full recovery, or any kind of a test situation, however you're measured, come up as so-called normal testing. Outcomes are particularly notable with peer support services that provide chronic conditions. You mentioned that already. Let's go to the next slide. Support specialists. We talked a little bit because I've been part of who we attracted. I've been part of the interview process. So when I go out and look for somebody to fill an open peer support specialist, if you're talking about substance abuse in particular, I look for somebody that's had at least 1 year sobriety, has a sponsor if they're working in a 12-step environment, somebody who has been through at least what's called the 5th step of the 12 steps. What is the 5th step? What that means is they've sat down with their sponsor, they told their sponsor all of the secrets in their life. Almost like moving into a Catholic confessional situation. You put everything on the table. You have to move through that so that they can start to develop their process. Those who serve identify their strengths and believe in their abilities to create the life they want. Points on who we attract. When I look at a resume, I see a lot of disconnects, long years of perhaps not working, things like that. I don't really care about that. What I care about is passion and desire. You have the passion for your own recovery. You have the passion to help other people recover as well. I can build on that. We also look for, is this person likely to show up for work? All right, sometimes that's not the case. We help people build that structure, show up for work over and over again. It's a very different pool of people than what you typically would see at UC. For instance, living with a mental illness, substance abuse disorder, we want them to demonstrate recovery. Concerned with what happened, not concerned so much with what happened, frankly. I want to know what can they do. It's not what's wrong with them. Peer support specialists will help them to figure out what stage of recovery this person is in. Typically, they're in very early stages of recovery. Probably 80% of our clients are on Medicaid. So that's what they typically use. Second bullet, we surround peers, the person we work with the possibility of recovery. There are typically 5 stages of recovery. The one is it's just no hope for me whatsoever. And they get a glint, possibility of hope, then they kind of move up to the scale towards hope recovery. What does recovery look like? Recovery looks like, for us, for example, substance abuse, longer periods of time in between reuse. We don't use the term relapse anymore. Made a decision to reuse. Use the term participant. We're starting to remove the language of shame from how we describe how people go back out again. We don't say go back out again. We say that they made a decision to reuse. It's still continuing to be part of those. Lastly, we help those who serve get in touch with their inner wisdom. About intuition. Help to move them into working with their inner guidance. Because what happens when you're in recovery from substance abuse in particular, also from mental health disorders, disconnect from your body. There's a disconnect. You're not in your body as well a whole lot. So we help to connect the body through meditation, exercise. We've actually walked out of classes and walked the right report. So we do that to help people reconnect with their bodies in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. We help one another move from hopelessness to experience. Have to have lived experience to be a peer. Individuals can provide personal recovery stories. We do that all the time. Stories we hear in our classes and in one-to-one, frankly, are shocking in many cases. The mere fact that they reveal those stories to us means that they're ready to heal and move on from that experience. We value and honor that. We need to working with our folks. Peer support specialists are in a position to help others in recovery from mental illness. We're in first-hand accounts of recovery. Everybody that is a peer has to have first-hand accounts. Recovery support specialists effectively communicate the personal stories they get the ability to instill hope and show clients. I always get embarrassed at times when I talk to the groups, unless I have a 25 years of experience living sober, because I don't want people to compare because you've got 6 months or what have you. I realize that it's important that I offer that as the opportunity for somebody to see that there is long-term recovery available if you do what we suggest that you do. We say suggest because you can't tell a recovering alcoholic what to do. It just doesn't work. We're careful with that. Peer support specialists effectively communicate the restored recovery as possible. Okay, through daily interactions, peer support specialists help to demonstrate how we can recover challenging situations and self-manage their condition. Before I go further, let me just talk a little bit about the PEER, P-I-E-R. That's a community recovery center in Newport. It's been open since January. And we are working with Kenton County Jail, what's called their JSAP program, Substance Abuse Program, JSAP. About 4 months before a prisoner is released, incarcerated individual, they start working inside with a number of programs to get them ready to be released. We come in sort of at the tail end of that 4-month experience. We introduce ourselves. We go into the jails, talk to the prisoners. We tell them about the PEER. So what does the PEER do? So when they leave the jail, they'll go to the PEER in Newport and receive a number of services. They'll go through that Arizona assessment, know how it can help them, and they go into classes. They're required in some cases to go into classes like what? Parenting classes, for example. A lot of people never taught how to be a parent. I know when I had my children, there was no book for me. Just did the best I could. We report back also to the court systems and let them know how well they're doing. That as well. We want to pick them up right at the end. Formally, somebody's supposed to get released at midnight and be out on the street in the middle of winter with no ID, no money, and where do they go? Normally, they'll go find their old resources and go right back to the lifestyle they had before. We try to prevent that. Let me give you a couple of statistics that I found shocking. In Campbell County Jail, 60% of the people in jail are there for drug-related offenses. 5 years of release of the jail, 75% return to jail. 75% recidivism rate after 5 years. I found that shocking. I think something needs to change in the system. We're starting to do that. As well as we're advocates. We go down to Frankfurt, we talk to legislators, and we advocate for certain things along with other interested parties to change people's lives. So the people, when they come out of jails in particular, can be ready to go to work, employable, pay taxes, et cetera, vote, and all those rights restored to them. As peer specialists, we create recovery partnerships to serve not only with the people we serve, but we also form partnerships with other agencies in Northern Kentucky. Center, for example, North Key, Life Learning Center, et cetera. We form partnerships with them. We want to make sure that we can move services back and forth to serve this clientele over a long period of time. We don't push as peer specialists. We don't lead. We don't stand over those we serve. We partner with them, walk forward in the recovery story. That's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope it was some interest.
We all, full disclosure here, I am president of the board of Mental Health America, Northern Kentucky, Southwest Ohio, and we really place a lot of on the whole idea of recovery. And Bob mentioned a lot about what happened in Northern Kentucky, but we also have these same kinds of services in Ohio as well, specifically right now up in the Warren and Clinton County areas. So we do serve clients on both sides of the river, but this has just been a really, we've got some great peers out there working, and Bob is an example of one of those, so thank you.
Thank you.
So as you mentioned, there's been an increase, positive thing, of the use of peer support in a variety of mental health and use organizations. Like I said, I think that's positive growth, but I think there's always the possibility to underestimate from an organization what it takes to support the peer support role in order for that to be successful for the participant in recovery, for the peer support specialist, so the organization can continue that model. So what do you think is really essential for as a peer support specialist to get from your organization?
As us as an
To
organization.
support your work as a peer support specialist.
How do I get support?
Yeah, what's key for an organization to
Well,
do?
Mental Health America, first of all, has a very, very strong commitment, not only locally, but nationally to peer activity. We are leaders nationally in that particular area. What attracted me to it, or to Mental Health America, is that I am fairly free to approach my participant the way I think that person needs to be approached. When a referral comes in for peer services, takes a look at that, who's the best match from a background standpoint to provide that service. My own role here is I have a somewhat different role from the so-called regular peer. I'm a peer mentor to the peers that are over at the peer because I have a very strong business background and operational management background. Those kinds of services to itself. Actually, to the culture, let's put that word into play. What attracts me to the culture of Mental Health America is I am pretty much free to get my nose into whatever issue I feel I need, like a carte blanche. So I don't ask for permission, I just go do it. I heard earlier talking about how do we collaborate with other people and such. I self-collaborate. So I will go in and annoy myself, or I encourage others to do the same. I'll connect people inside. And I always haven't been at cultures that have allowed me to do that. I've worked with some very large companies. Anheuser-Busch, for example, I worked with the federal government, Department of Defense, Department of Energy. I didn't see that same culture as I see here. We're very much free to express our opinion, to give information. One more piece. We also measure people's strengths. We put them through a strengths assessment, where we take those 5 strengths and we create partnerships inside of Mental Health America based on the strengths that people have. I'm in charge of that responsibility. So I'm very much aware, especially my human resource background, the kind of culture that we want. We also take those strengths, we're building a strengths bank, a skills bank, for people to move forward. That by you can exponentially move forward quicker through collaboration if you're out there as a single individual. So I'm very much supported from the people I work with and the culture. I think if you're going to put peers in where they don't have them yet, you've got to measure your culture first to see if it's right. And your messaging internally has to be very clear as far as what your intention is and how you want that to be working. And then support that peer after a while. Peer activities aren't easily understood at first. We work with social workers and therapists. We're sort of part social worker, part therapist, and part lived experience all rolled into one. We're also very careful about crossing those lines. Very much a generalist, if you will. The comparison I have is if you have, because I have to go to my primary doctor to get specialist services, right? This is how the world works. I'm sort of a primary doctor, but I have specialists available to me. I sort of get involved in the primary diagnosis a little bit, not primary diagnosis, but kind of a care plan thing. I want to make sure that people are taken care of at so many different levels.
Yeah.
Sure.
I know we need to get moving, but I've been thinking, sitting here listening to this, and from the perspective of how might academia or our academic health center be of help? And the first thought that came into my mind was, stay the hell away because we would just screw it up. and I mean that, but it's like, so what I'm hearing is a fluid culture that takes advantage of a lot of on the ground experience in ways and brings it to bear in the ways that it can be most helpful. You have to understand that's not our culture at all. Our culture is licenses and certifications, and you can do this because you have this license, and you can do this license and this training, and it's not that from the healthcare perspective, the academic perspective, not that we would not want to in any way we can help, but we bring something that would certainly, even as I'm thinking about it myself, would seem very alien to the way that you work. Okay. And so I would be nervous about inflicting that on you, and yet I believe that there's a lot of interest in talent. We're not peers. We don't have that experience, so we don't bring that. But there's a lot of training. There's a lot of capability. You were saying, the one thing I wrote down that you said is, we try it. If it works, we keep doing it. We bring a more methodical way of looking at things that you're doing, data that you're collecting, things like that, and approach the answers to those questions in a different way that could be helpful without getting in the way. But I'm wondering whether you and your organization have thought about, gee, if we only had, we could use the help this way. If I could get a university or an academic health center on board, or are you thinking the same way I am, which is keep them the hell away from me? It's a real dilemma because we have a lot of resources, but it would be a true challenge to figure out how to actually bring them to bear in a way that would be helpful to you. Conversation. Okay. And now's not the time to do it, but I do think that it's like, is there anything we have that you need or want or could use? The other thing that struck me is the nature of volunteer-driven organizations is that on the one hand, they have limited resources. On the other hand, they have unlimited resources because people that are passionate about something will volunteer to their very last second. And so when you start thinking about grants and funding, it's like we don't really need all that much because we do a lot on a shoestring. And it's working just fine, but we could use, gee, if we had one more facility, if we had one more this, one more that. But I'm wondering how much of that sort of formalism that we would bring with grants and things like that would actually get in the way. Okay, all right. But it's two different worlds, both trying to do good, but it's still two different worlds.
I understand, but I think there's a conversation that can happen. I think there are many things that we can perhaps talk about.
Okay, excellent.
I think our organization would love to have.
Okay, I think we would love to talk to you because I think we have people in this space, but in the space in a different way than everybody and everything that you're doing. Okay, so we have our fourth presentation day. Nancy is the executive director of 1 in 5, which is mental health education for schools, and that is obviously a place that is very important that we don't generally bring to bear in this group. So I'm very anxious to hear what's going on in the school environment.
Hey, Nancy, you ready to take it?
I think so. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'll just give you a little background on 1 in 5, how we got started. My husband actually worked at Xavier, and he died by suicide very suddenly, for us at least, in 2008. He was a loud, goofy person who it came totally out of the blue. And so I spent a lot of time just educating myself about what was going on in this arena. And what became very clear to me is that mental health issues surface very young in life, and that the time between symptoms surfacing and then interaction in services is usually at 8 to 10 years. And so that really spurred me to start looking at mental health education earlier in schools. So that's really what we do. Our mission is that we're trying to promote optimal mental health for Greater Cincinnati youth through stigma reduction and evidence-based education, so that we live in a world without suicide. This is sort of what spurred me on, basically, is that suicide is now the second leading cause of death between the age of 13 and 24. As I said, it's 20% are obviously the name of our organization is 1 in 5, which indicates the number of people that struggle with a mental health condition. And that, as I mentioned, that it's surfacing very young. So by the age of 14, 50% of mental health is surfaced. By the age of 24, 75 is surfaced. And on average, it takes 8 to 10 years to get service. And for me, that was just unacceptable that we were allowing that to happen. These are just some additional facts that exist out there. One thing that a lot of people are now saying is that we are in a crisis when it comes to our youth mental health. The CDC has identified that as the number one issue that we have as a world right now. And so how do we go about changing that conversation in the schools? So what we do as an organization is normally we go in and we do a climate survey. That climate survey is conducted with students, parents, and staff at that school. And then once we get that climate survey, we do a needs assessment and we decide programming applications that we wanted to put into place. We got a big grant from Interact for Health about 4 years ago to identify evidence-based programs that exist in the United States. So we are not using our own programming. We're using programs that are evidence-based, that are national programs. And so when we look at a school, every school is unique. We look at it as an individual school. What are their needs? What have they tried in the past? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What are the barriers? And then we start to put together a long-term plan. And I say it all the time, it's a layering process that happens. You start with a couple of things and you just keep layering and layering and layering on top of that year to year. And then we go back at the end and then we would do another assessment to see how much progress we're making. Why evidence-based? I mean, there are a lot of things that are going on out there. I'm sure all of you are totally on board with this. A lot of the schools don't get what evidence-based means. So we have to do a lot of education around that, why that's important. You have a lot of communities that have people coming in that have no evidence that what they're doing is working, and yet they're still doing it in a lot of schools here in Cincinnati. As I said, these are the programs that we put together. We called this the roadmap. So it starts elementary all the way through high school prevention and interventions. And then we also have a lot of parent, and then we work with a lot of staff members as well to do trainings. As you can see, there are a lot of different options. When we're working in the elementary school, we're working on a lot of social and emotional learning. We're trying to create tools so that the kids have the resources they need to deal with as they age. A lot of times at the high school level right now, those kids are very, very stressed. They are not very resilient at all. So we still do a lot of social and emotional learning programming there as well. We talk a lot about self-care. We talk a lot about just basic human skills that they need to have in place that a lot of kids really don't at this point. There's one program here called Surviving the Teens. When we first started the organization, we worked exclusively with Children's Hospital in that program. And that program is still, as I call it, the foundation of where we start to build from. It's
Nancy?
Can you make your screen bigger? Can you and run the show so that we can see the slides? Because you have a lot of information that we're not able to read.
Kind of small. So if you put it on all the way down at the bottom, there's a little, it looks like a screen, like a little.
There you go. Well, just run the show.
Yeah.
That help?
Run the slideshow.
In the bottom right corner of your
Run the
screen.
slideshow. Okay, I can do that.
Perfect.
2 over.
Well,
You
No, she was at the
Okay.
beginning, yeah.
Okay, now it's smaller.
So you can see that, as I said, the Surviving the Teens is a program Children's Hospital actually implements. We fund that in a very large way for them. So that program alone has been able to go from 24 schools to 75 schools in the last year. And as I said, we see that as the foundation of information. It's a week-long program. It talks about signs and symptoms, resources, how to have the conversation. It's very interactive now. It was totally redone by Tier 1 training, and we get really good response to that. You can see there's a wide variety of different programs, and every school is doing a little bit differently.
Nancy, I'm sorry, but it still is somewhat small. Could
No,
you?
we're seeing your preview page, which
Yeah.
is the
Turn off your notes.
slide plus the next slide.
You can turn off your notes.
No, you know what, you should just keep going, because I know the solution to this, but it would take a while to get there. Let's just keep going.
I have it so that I have it on the slide shows going, and I shared it, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, we just wanted to see the slide that you're on, but you're showing us your preview slide as well.
You have the presentation that hopefully we can share it after as well.
Great, thank you for being willing to share that.
Totally, yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Okay, let's see, how can I go on? Not sure really what's happening here. Okay, so like I've lost control of the.
Just hit the play button
Just go
towards
to the
the right
QPR
at the
slide.
bottom of the screen. Nancy, where it says slide 7 of 16, go down and click on the play button to the right so you can move forward. Go to the bottom of the screen. Yep, you did it. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just more, I just went into a little bit more detail. I don't know if any of you are familiar with QPR training. It is similar to CPR training, where it's very basic information. It's the gatekeeper training that we recommend for all staff and all schools. We're starting to do some training with CPS at their coach level as well. And it's really just basic information about that people know what they're looking for, they know what the resources are, and they know how to get somebody to that help. It forces them to have that conversation, because over and over what we hear is that I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. I'm afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing. So this program forces them to actually practice that languaging. It's only about an hour and a half, which is a beautiful thing. There's some other programs out there that are evidence-based as well that are great, but if it's an 8-hour class across the board, they will not train their entire staff. They'll do counselors, they'll do some of the administration, but they won't train anybody. With QPR, we've trained the majority of the schools we're working with, the entire staff. So that has been extremely, extremely helpful. As I said, when we think everybody that is in the school should be trained, including parents and kids and anybody, community members, anybody else out in the community. As I said, it takes about an hour and a half. And it's we've also trained 49 trainers in Cincinnati. So we have a whole force of people that can out there and do that training on a regular basis. So that's one program that over and over that we are doing on a regular basis. Other things that we think should be in place is a peer-to-peer program. There are 2 programs that we recommend. One's called Bring Change to Mind, which was started by the actress Glenn Close about 4 years ago. They did a pilot out in California at the high school level. UCLA did all of the research. The outcomes were incredible. They moved from there to LA, and now we got them to come to Cincinnati last year. So right now we have 13 schools in Cincinnati that are doing the program. It's more of a club. It's more about raising awareness of the conversation. There are weekly newsletters. There's a portal that the kids can get all kinds of information and ideas about how to have this conversation. And it's had very good traction here in Cincinnati. The other one is called Sources of Strength. It is more upstream and it's more about character strengths. How do you build that community? How do you work off of people's strengths so that when they're in crisis, they know how to fall back to something that they're very strong at. Again, it's about a 8-hour training that happens, their peers, their peer leaders, and it's an ongoing education. There's a lot more curriculum in that program than there would be in a Bring Change to Mind program. Some of the other things that some of the other pieces of that, as I said, there are portals in both cases. There are libraries of campaign ideas. In both cases, we have local support that we've trained somebody at 1 in 5 in both cases, and she is working extensively with the schools. Sources of Strength is actually the program of choice in the state of Kentucky as far as peer-to-peer, and the state of Kentucky has a grant that they will pay for that, that program to be in place. Change to Mind, they actually give you a grant of $500. It's free of charge. The Sources of Strength cost about $5,000 for a school year to do that program. So there's a huge difference as far as what the costs are for schools. So a lot of times, and I haven't really talked about this, for us, we try to take away all the barriers. Last year, we donated about $350,000 out to schools to do this programming. Because for me, it's a mission and it's very personal. And but I feel very strongly that the more education we can get in there, the better the outcome's going to be. And one of the major hurdles is money. So we write a lot of grants. We have a lot of sponsorships that allow us to fund a lot of this programming ourselves. The big things that we do is the Warrior Run. It happened a couple weeks ago at the first weekend in October. It was the 10th year that we've done that event. That's how we started. There was actually 2014, I don't know if you remember, Brogan Dolly was a UC student that died by suicide. I reached out to Santa Ono at that point, and he was very adamant that we create a high school and college challenge part of the race. So we do that today. The high school challenge this last year, I think we had 10 schools that participated. Turpin won the challenge. They raised about $8,000, and 100% of the money that they raised goes back to them to do mental health education programming. The other thing that we saw this year is the number of actual teens that were participating in the race raised significantly. It's a very upbeat, very community oriented. It's just the energy out there is amazing, and it's all very positive energy. So the kids are really engaging in that conversation at an increasing level, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing. The other thing, we really work on community initiatives. We work really closely with MindPeace. I don't know if you're familiar with MindPeace, but they work to put counselors into schools. Right now, they're working with about 165 schools in Cincinnati. So I don't like to work in a school unless MindPeace is there, because if you're going to start identifying kids, they have to be able to get into service quickly. Out in the community, it's about a 6-month wait for kids to get to see a counselor. When the counselors are in the schools, they can see them usually the next day. So between us, we created the Brain Health Network. We have 14 area schools that come together at the principal level to have this discussion. We've done a lot of different things to date. We've created educational videos. Right now, we're currently working with a doctor from St. Louis who is all about knowing what the mental health numbers are of the kids and then looking at the academic model and how do we change that academic model to take off some of the pressure that we're currently putting on these kids. We also do the Youth Innovation Challenge. We've done it for 2 years. We bring together, this year we had about 50 high school and college kids come together for the weekend. We teach them about design thinking. We give them the mental health prompts and they come up with ideas. From this year, we funded 6 of those teams to move forward to implement those ideas. The team that won the most money wants to do, they're working on virtual reality for the adults in their life, including the teachers and their parents, so that they'll understand what anxiety and depression actually feel like. And I had mentioned before, we work really closely with Children's Hospital. So that Surviving the Teens program, as I said, is the foundational piece that we like to see in place. And as I said, it went from 24 to 70 schools last year. Sort of a basis of overall what we do. I think that in my mind, we move and we shift a lot. We work extensively with youth. We think they're going to change this conversation fast. Adult population. We have 10 interns that work for us. There's also a youth council for suicide prevention that was at Children's Hospital that got moved to 1 in 5 last year. That's another about 25 high school kids that come together on a monthly basis that talk about ideas of how we change this conversation faster. So we've had great success. Right now we're working with about 41 schools in Cincinnati plus the 5 universities. And as I said, every school that we work with looks a little bit different. But we're seeing great progress in how that climate of those schools is changing to have a more open conversation about mental illness and mental health. An overview. I don't know if anybody has any questions, comments.
I'm good now. Okay. Hi, Nancy. This is Jack Keys. This sounds like a fantastic program, and it sounds like the schools are lining up to get on board. Are you getting any pushback from parents or hearing any pushback? This is such a touchy area, and it's just hard to navigate that space. I was just wondering if what your biggest challenges have been when you've gotten into these schools.
For the most part, the schools push through the parent pushback. The biggest place where they can have an impact is when a child is identified and then the parent will say, I don't want them to go into service. For the most part, they don't really, like we do a program called Signs of Suicide, which is an actual screen. We've done it probably at 8 schools now. Marymount was the first that did it, and they had an opt-out option and nobody opted out.
Oh, okay.
For the most part, they don't resist the education piece. It's that once you want to put the child into counseling, as I said, we work with MindPeace, and they track that about 70% of the time the child is going into counseling. And if they're not, it's the parent is resisting for some reason. Either it's monetary or it's because they don't want them to be in service at school. They don't want them to be identified, all kinds of those barriers.
The other thing that I'm wondering about, I come from a family of teachers, so I hear lots of teacher stories. And that is often, when they engage a student that they consider to be at risk, they frequently find that the student is the tip of the iceberg, and many of the problems are at the family level. And sometimes it's, that the student is just sort of passing that along. Do you run into much of that, and is that part of your program?
As I said, for me, we don't really like to work with any school unless there's a mental health partner in place. Yes. That's getting the child into service that's critical. So once I'm on the front end of it, where I'm doing the education piece to identify somebody, and then I'm passing them off to the mental health partner who is actually doing the service part. Thanks.
And then my final question is, a lot of what you described engages the students to help each other, the peer programs. I'm wondering how that is worked out. You know, that the culture of high schools is so, which is the word that comes to mind, but I just wonder whether, you know, whether you've been able to be successful with a peer program in that kind of environment.
Absolutely. I mean, the kids are talking to each other way more than they're talking to adults. We don't believe that they should be they should not be your gatekeepers, though. We don't want them to feel responsible for somebody else's well-being. We want them to be more upstream, to be building resiliency, to be having the conversation, to be supporting each other. But then really the adult should be your gatekeeper in the situation. So the two programs that we recommend are more upstream, where you're building resiliency, you're building tools, you're building conversation starters, all of those kinds of things. But the kids are educated enough to know that, okay, I see this, this is who I need to go to. And I'm going to have this conversation and I'm going to try to solve this problem. We do not want them doing that.
Great. Anybody have other questions or comments for Nancy? Yes.
Hey Nancy, it's Robin Lindquist Grants at the Institute for Policy Research, Youth Council Prevention.
And
It's been a while. So that's how I met Nancy, and I will say everything you're hearing here from her as far as her motivation to get this out is 100% true. She approached us at the council, which is many children, and I mean she's ready to go, right? So part of my question for you is, I know you mentioned you're working with 5 universities. I'm sure on the various parts of your program. Are there other things you feel like you could use from the university, other types of supports or interests you have in programs and working with or other folks at the university?
interesting because, you know, this is a very difficult thing to track and to show improvement because you're doing it over a wide range of different programs. We did get a big grant that we're going to be working with Children's Hospital. We're going to be taking intake data from the emergency room, and we're going to be mapping the city by schools of hot spots and cold spots. And then we'll be working on why are they hot? How do we help them bring down some of that tension? And then why are they cold? What are they in that area? That's one area. We also just started working with Xavier. They really want to work with us on our climate survey to try to authenticate that instrument. But we're always open to people that want to come in and help us our process, what we're doing, how do we measure what we're doing. I come from a research background, so I'm always open to that. We have 5 pillars that we work with. One is education and programming, one is stigma reduction, one is community engagement, one is advocacy and policy work, which I didn't talk about. We're working on legislation right now. Tom Brinkman and Bridget Kelly are co-sponsoring that bill. It would make it mandatory in the state of Ohio that there be mental health education, kindergarten through the 12th grade. So if anybody wants to help us with that. And the last piece is the measurement and data. So we're constantly looking at how do we measure what we're doing? How do we prove that it's working? So, yes, I'm open to any collaboration that we could do there.
Well, certainly we have a lot of people here at the, across the university that have an interest in that area in general. Some of them may be crossing the street to work with children or already doing that. Others may be working on it separately, but in terms of grant writers, we have a lot of grant writing experience, as well as program evaluation expertise and data collection, cleaning, analysis, all of that stuff. So we have those pieces around, and I feel certain that this would be an area that would attract a lot of attention among people here. So we will see what we can do about hooking you up.
Okay, that would be great.
Anybody else?
Nancy, this is Sharon DeMario. Thank you so much for responding to my request for you to be here today.
Sure. I'm glad I could be here.
This is always very helpful for us to hear both sides. As we, trying to bridge the applied and what's going on in the community with the academic perspective. If nothing else, just physically, it's hard to make those connections. But I think it's helpful to hear what's going on back and forth and then begin exploring ways that we can start working together, because I think that there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of funding agencies, particularly federal funding agencies, are now very interested in seeing how we are applying the research and the theory and the training that we're doing. And so we're seeing more and more money in that space. And it's the challenge to getting that money is to find the right team, people from both perspectives. And I think that this kind of meeting helps to get that started. So I'm hoping that we can follow up with this relatively soon to see whether we can find opportunities where we can work together to get funding to be able to help both sides of the equation here. So we've run over a few minutes, but it's been very helpful. Sorry we didn't have more time for discussion. We do periodically bring these topics back around so that we can do follow-up, and we will get information out from this meeting to everybody that was on the call and the TCN in general. And then we will try to find groups of people that have an interest around particular topics, and we will try to make sure that they get connected so that we can move on to next steps. So thanks everybody for attending our third virtual meeting. I hope you found it useful. If you have an interest in contacting us or any of the presenters, please let us know, and we'll make sure that you have the contact information, although I think everybody put that on their slides. But we'll make sure that we can make those individual contacts as well as group contacts. So with that, we're going to end our webinar here. And thank you very much for coming again, and we hope to see you in the future at another webinar that we do. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody. I hope this was helpful.